All right, Photoshop part 4, just finishing off our super basics. You need to know how to save a file. So if you like what you've been experimenting with and want to save kind of your first foray into Photoshop, I'm going to give you the breakdown on that. So if I want to save this chopped up version of my original photo that I was working with, it's not my original, but the photo that I initially started with, we're going to come up to File, and we're going to go to Save As. Don't do Save, because Save As allows you to save a different version. You don't want to save over your original. So File, Save As, and it's going to show me where it'll be saving to. Right now it's just going to save to my desktop. The file name you get to decide, obviously, but please do not try and mess with anything after the period. That little dot and then the couple letters that'll be after the period or the dot, this is the file extension, and it indicates the file type. So when you see it says PSD right here, that corresponds to Photoshop document, and you'll see when it says the file name, PSD, right below it, it says Save As Type, and that's where it tells you Photoshop, and it gives you all the different kinds of abbreviations for those. It's pretty much always going to be called PSD. What that is just a Photoshop document. It can only be opened in Photoshop. You cannot open the file in Chrome. You can't open it in Microsoft Paint. It is proprietary or only understood by Photoshop. It's a unique type of file. And it saves it as a Photoshop document because of all the edits that you make in their program, the layers and then the adjustments that we're going to start making and the heavy editing and all those changes. If you flatten that out into just a JPEG, you'll never be able to come back and access those layers or adjustments again. It'll just be back to being a flat image. So if you haven't saved your document before, you'll be creating a PSD. You always want to make sure to save your PSD throughout the process too. As you add layers, add adjustments, just make sure that you're saving and updating that PSD. But since this is the first time that we're creating that Photoshop document with our edits, this is the first PSD that we will have made. So file name, I'm fine with it being called abstract.psd. I'm making sure that the file type is a Photoshop document. Check out when you do click this though, there's so many options here. Don't worry about getting overwhelmed. All you need to know is PSD or JPEG for the most part. Those are what we're going to be working with 99% of the time. So I'm going to leave it as Photoshop document. You don't need to worry about any of these pieces down here, but notice that layers is checked. That means that when you save it as this kind of file, it's preserving layers. You will still have your layers when you open this document again, and you'll be able to keep going in and working with those. So I'm going to go to save. It's just asking about compatibility. Click OK, don't worry about it. And so now if you look on my desktop, I'm going to open Explorer. And I have such a messy desktop, but you can see abstract PSD is right there below this original image that we started with. Obviously I can't open it or get a preview of it because it's a PSD file that only Photoshop can make sense of, but I know it's there and I know that I've saved it. Also notice the file size is much bigger because now we have made some changes like different layers and stuff, and that increases the file size. Okay. So let's say we've got our Photoshop document. If we ever want to go back and keep editing the layers, you always want to save one of those. But if we're like, I'm ready to print this out, I'm done with this file, I'm turning this in, and you want to save it as something that can go in Google Classroom or into your drive or to a printer, you want to save a flat JPEG version of it, which is what you'll be turning in as like your final files. So I'm going to come here to File. I'm going to go again to Save As. And what you don't want to do is go to File, Save As, change it to a JPEG, and just not change the name at all if the name's the same as the original. So I can go to JPEG right now in the file type and save that, but if this is the same name as my original file, it's going to ask if I want to save over that. So I'd be overwriting my original with this edited version and again lose my original, which you never want to do. So you're going to come here, again, take note of where it's going to save to, make sure that you have changed the name to reflect the fact that this is the one that you edited. So I'm just, for the sake of simplicity, going to call this abstract edited.jpg because I went down here to the file type and I changed it to a JPEG. And notice that no longer is the layers box selected because you cannot have layers with a JPEG. It's a flat image. You do not any longer have access to this editing capability in Photoshop. It's just like any file that you would, or any photo you'd download from the internet, it's flat. So we're going to click save. This is mildly important. Generally, you don't have to worry about it, but again, if it's a high quality file that you plan to print or save or do anything cool with, noticing the image quality is important. For our class, this will generally work, but again, if you wanted something to be like gallery worthy, you might really want to go to like the maximum quality here and set that to 10. But high, not medium. High is definitely good enough for this class. And it'll save you some file size. Okay, so click OK. And now if I go back to my File Explorer, I can check on my desktop. Now I've got these all saved as different files. I have my abstract original image. I have the Photoshop version that retains my layers and edits if I want to keep making changes. And now I have this JPEG that I've edited with, moving those pieces around. One last thing I want you to notice, though, is that here in Photoshop, you can see that these pieces I cut out, there's that transparent checkered background, which means normally those would be see-through. But when I save it as a JPEG, those turn white. That's because JPEG file types do not support transparency. There are file types that do, that would leave those see-through. So whatever you put this file on top of, you would see through this area. But JPEG, anything that's supposed to be transparent, it turns to white or whatever color you have in your settings for it to change that to, because, again, JPEGs cannot do transparency. And we can talk more about file types if people want to do things with transparency and if that becomes relevant, but just for simplicity's sake, we're really going to be working with PSDs, so Photoshop documents, and JPEGs 99% of the time. So once you know you've got all those different things saved, we're going to close this. And the super important finishing up part is to make sure that it gets to your drive. So I'm going to go to my Google Drive. And we're going to put all of those in our imaging folder. So please make sure that you're keeping your folders organized. I'm going to try and come up with like a recommended list of folders and organization, but for now you got to kind of see my back end of my files in Google Drive here when I go into my folders. So imaging for me is going to go in lesson plans and into my Photoshop section. Again, I recommend making a folder for each new project, and I would definitely start a Photoshop intro or a Photoshop basics folder. See, I have the PS intro right here. So I'm going to go into that, and we're just in the very basics phase. So this is where I'm going to upload as practice. To do this, I'm going to go to new, file upload, and again, this is really important. This is the time where you need to make sure you're doing it the slow way by going to new file upload and not just dragging and dropping, because Photoshop files are the ones that I have been told will occasionally be corrupted if you try and drag and drop them. It can apparently damage your file. So I have found my abstract PSD, my abstract edited JPEG, and then the original. I'm going to put all three of those into Google Drive because then I know that every stage of this project is saved and I have it on hand and organized. How you can do that is click on one, hold down Control on your keyboard, and click the other files that you want to upload, and it'll select multiple ones at once. Then when I click open, it's going to start to load all of those into my drive. So once you've done that, now you know you've come full circle from creating a new file or opening an image, making some edits, saving that edited version as a Photoshop document, which retains your layers and your editing capabilities. We've also flattened that edited version into a JPEG, so that's an image that you could put on your digital portfolio or you could turn into me in Google Classroom and I will easily be able to open. It's not something that has to be opened through Photoshop. So I hope that helps. I'm obviously here to answer any questions, but this is always there for you to refer to if you forget any of these steps or if you're ever absent. So hope that was helpful, and get ready for some more fun Photoshop stuff. It gets real serious after this.